Right, I think we're going to get started. Let's get underway. I wish to begin by warmly welcoming everyone, and especially to everyone for taking the time on a Friday to join this briefing. My name is Hinaway Luce, and I am the Control Arms representative based in Geneva. On 9 June of this month, the disarmament and arms control community witnessed a major achievement, and that was the adoption without a vote of the global framework for through-life conventional ammunition management. Considering the challenging political environment prevailing today and that ammunition has long been a contentious issue, the adoption of a comprehensive framework that addresses the entire ammunition life cycle is a significant breakthrough. Leading the negotiation of the global framework was Mr. Albrecht von Wittke. When he is not chairing the open-ended working group on ammunition, Mr. von Wittke is the head of division for conventional disarmament, arms control, and confidence and security building measures worldwide in the Federal Foreign Office of Germany. Mr. von Wittke brings an extensive background in export controls and disarmament and arms control generally. He was also a member of the German delegation that negotiated the Arms Trade Treaty. Today's discussion with Mr. von Wittke provides us all with an opportunity to gain insights into the accomplishments and obstacles encountered in the negotiations of the global framework, to understand its implications for the Arms Trade Treaty and explore ways in which states and all stakeholders can get behind and support this framework. Now, this briefing is for 1 hour and 1 hour only, and please feel free to post questions in the chat function. Also, this event will be recorded and it will be made available on Control Arms' social media accounts. Well, welcome to the man of the moment, Mr. von Wittke, and thanks very much for dedicating your time to be here with us today. The advanced version of the final report of the open-ended working group on ammunition, which includes the global framework, has been posted or is about to be posted in the chat function. And if members of the audience read through the global framework, they will encounter what is a somewhat unorthodox document in disarmament and arms control. For example, the document includes guiding principles, objectives, and in the annex, you will find rationales for the objectives. Mr. von Wittke, turning to you, for those in the audience who didn't follow the work of the open-ended working group, can you take us through how the global framework is structured and the reasoning behind this structure? Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Hinaway, for that introduction and also for the congratulations. Yes, the structure for the global framework, as you said, is not the average disarmament or arms control instrument. And I think that relates to two issues. First of all, or more than two issues, actually. First of all, the mandate we received from the General Assembly was to negotiate a set of political commitments. So this is not a legally binding treaty, and that has, if you want, some drawbacks when you look at the way that it has no legal force when it's implemented, but it gives you more liberty because you can do away with things, for example, like definitions, which normally are a good way to derail any process. And they also give you the liberty to be less prescriptive in some areas because people are not taking on them legally binding obligations. That is, I think, reflected here. What we have done is try to establish a structure for the global framework that actually corresponds to the purpose. So we didn't follow a preordained structure, but we tried to build the structure to serve the purpose of the global framework. And maybe one important thing is to remember that this global framework is only meant to be one layer of a multi-layer effort of the international community in trying to get to grips with the issues around conventional ammunition management. So this is the global layer that is to be supplemented by efforts at regional, sub-regional, and national level. And that also dictates a bit the structure of the document. So what do we have? You mentioned already, we have a preamble and guiding principles. The preamble, if you want, very much setting out what the problem is, guiding principles, setting out the broader, let's say, framework in which we are situating our global framework. And then when we come to our cooperative framework, as the heart, the core of the global framework is termed, we have a set of 15 objectives, which are stating headline goals to which all states are committing politically under the global framework. And if you've looked at the list, those range from issues that relate more to the sustainability of through life conventional ammunition management, like for example, the objectives, roughly speaking, 1 to 4. Then you have a set of objectives that is more closely related to to safety issues of conventional ammunition management. That is objectives 4, 5, 6, and also 7 in a certain way. And then the next part would be those relating more to the security of conventional ammunition, obviously, this also includes objective 7 and goes further down until objective 13. And then you have a specific objective regarding gender and a specific objective regarding cooperation with relevant stakeholders. So that is the structure of the objectives. And for each objective, we have 2 sets of measures, actually. And again, this is a set of political commitments. I think you wouldn't be able to do that in a legally binding document. We have 1 set of measures that are entitled common enabling measures, and that are designed to realize the individual objectives. And those common enabling measures are measures that all states are committing to, and all states are supposed to implement and apply those measures. And then there's a second set of measures. They are called additional possible enabling measures. And those are measures that could provide additional benefits to achieving the objective in specific national or regional contexts. So again, we have 2 tiers of measures. The purpose of the second set of measures is, on the one hand, give every state implementing the global framework already a menu of issues that they might want to look into and see whether their national situation, their specific national situation, warrants the implementation of these additional possible enabling measures. And at the same time, those are measures that states that want to, if you want, top up the global layer commitments and the global framework with something regional or sub-regional. So there's a kind of menu that they could draw from. And the idea, if you look into the report of the group of governmental experts 2020 and 2021, they recommended that at the regional or sub-regional level, those efforts could also take the form of legally binding agreements between the members of the region or sub-region. So that's a kind of menu from which they can choose from. So this explains a bit the structure of the objectives and of the different sets of measures. So the common enabling measures and the additional possible enabling measures. So if you then go further, you will have something that is, again, relatively normal in an arms control instrument, but has a particular importance in this context. That is the section on international cooperation and assistance. It was flagged from the beginning, from the first session of the open-ended working group, that this would be really at the core of all the reflections and all the efforts of the group. You will find dispersed throughout the different measures already a little bit of international cooperation and assistance, but there's also a specific section on that. And then finally, obviously, you need a section for the follow-up and review that basically explains how at the global level, at international level, that follow-up and review would be governed. And that is in comparison to some things you have in other fora related to arms control and disarmament, relatively light touch follow-up mechanism to not overburden the states that are implementing the global framework. One, I think, also particular feature is the annex. The annex is entitled "The Rationales for Objectives in the Global Framework," and has a chapeau that also indicates what the purpose is. So it gives additional background for those that haven't participated in the negotiations and wonder why a specific objective is so relevant for safe, secure, and sustainable through-life conventional ammunition management. And at the same time, they also established the link between the objective and the measures. They in the first draft for the outcome document, those rationales were placed between, let's say, placed between the objectives and the different sets of measures for each individual objective. So there was, let's say, optically also a clear link between objective and measures. To tidy up the document and to make negotiation easier, we've decided at a certain stage to move those rationales from the main body of the text, from the section Our Cooperative Framework, to the annex. But at the end of the negotiations, there was agreement to keep the annex as part and parcel of the global framework. That was important to a number of delegations. And for the team that has been drafting the global framework, I think this is a very rewarding result, because we really think that rationales are worth keeping them as part and parcel of the global framework. So that is the structure, and I hope it answers your questions. A question on that, and obviously I'm happy to go into even more detail if you want.
No, thanks very much. You know, you began by saying that you know, in a politically binding document, you have more liberty. And I think one good thing about the rationale and what this document avoids is ambiguity. And long after this negotiation, long after this adoption, people looking at this document, as you say, will be able to understand why certain objectives are actually in there. Just moving, one follow-up question I would like to ask, and that is looking at the objectives. And as you say, there are 15 objectives in the global framework, and these cover a range of issues, from supporting regional and sub-regional mechanisms to establishing through-life systems for inventory management and record keeping. How were the objectives decided on? Was this something that had to be consulted on with states at the beginning of the negotiations, or was it a very clear path that these would be the objectives?
Well, the objectives themselves are, if you want, the outcome of the first session, where basically delegations were asked, what are the relevant issues that you consider should go into the global framework, should be dealt with in the global framework? And then the 15 objectives is just an effort by the drafters, if you want, to put these different focuses, these different core issues that the framework should be dealing with in a, let's say, more or less sensible order, and to also group them together in a sensible way. This is certainly not the only way to do it. There have been, through the negotiation process, some objectives have been merged, some others have been dissociated from each other, and so on. So, for example, the first draft had 16 objectives. So it's not that we came with an established list of objectives and said, how do we fill that? But it developed, if you want, organically from the discussions in the first substantive session. And obviously, there were two bases for the work of the working group as per the establishing resolution. One was the report by the group of governmental experts, and one was the opinions expressed by member states. So also inspiration was drawn from the GGE report, but yeah. to more important part, I'd say that it's contributions from member states that drove the objectives and basically are responsible for them being organized the way they are now organized. So, and then obviously, again, I mentioned that there's a certain sequence of objectives pertaining to sustainability, then to safety, then to security, then to other issues. That there's some overlap, for example, between the safety and security issues. Inventory management, for example, is something that is both important for safety and for security. So that's unavoidable, and we've just tried to keep a certain rational order, and that would allow for states implementing the global framework to find their way through it, to for example, when they assess their national situation, also to look into where a more heavy accent needs to be placed regarding gaps in conventional ammunition management, because after all, the purpose was to fill gaps in conventional ammunition management, to actually establish a safer, secure, and more sustainable through-life conventional ammunition management all across the world.
Yeah, thanks very much. Now we get to a very, really a moment to reflect on these successes, and that is, I would be interested to hear what you regard as the key achievements of the global framework.
That's actually not really easy to answer. Let's say I could answer procedurally. I think the question of conventional ammunition for small arms and light weapons has been haunting the program of action on small arms and light weapons since its inception. So that's roughly 25 years that this issue has been discussed without a consensus conclusion of that discussion, and I think that made that life relatively hard. And now, as was promised, I think in the negotiations of the international tracing instrument, there's a dedicated framework on conventional ammunition, not only for small arms and light weapons, but obviously that expressly includes ammunition for small arms and light weapons. I think that's one of the important achievements, even though basically that's a different playing field. Then I think obviously we benefit from the discussions that have been had under the POA and under other instruments. But for example, if you look at Objective 11, we have here, and I can just read it out: enhance the marking and tracing of conventional ammunition under national ownership and control. So I think having marking and tracing of conventional ammunition in one sentence in this global framework, and having this global framework adopted without a vote by UN member states, I think that's some progress that until very recently a lot of people might not have imagined. So I think it simply shows you that the way that people came together in the negotiations of the open-ended working group and really engaged with each other, they not only engage with the chair, they engage very much with each other, and found solutions to these questions, which so far had been very, very difficult to solve. And again, if I may take the negotiations around Objective 11, that was done under, if you want, the voluntary leadership of our Brazilian colleague, and all states that had a stake in that specific objective came together without the chair involving, and looked at the issue and tried to accommodate each other's concerns and so on, and finally came up with a text, not only the objective itself, but all the measures in there that worked, and that worked for the whole community negotiating that. I would think that the objective in itself is a key achievement, but I think also the cooperative way in which the whole global framework has been set up and has been negotiated is an achievement in itself. I hope that obviously the global framework will be an important contribution to make first of all, to establish the thought of through life conventional ammunition management. So far, let's say we have a lot of good material, for example, in the international ammunition technical guidelines regarding stockpiling of conventional ammunition. The title under which we were negotiating, if you want, the resolution that started this process is problems of conventional ammunition stockpiles in surplus. So it's conventional ammunition stockpiles in surplus. That's extremely restrictive. Now we are looking at through life management of conventional ammunition of all calibers, not only the stockpiles, but from the point of production through transfer, through obviously stockpiling, but until use or eventually disposal. So it's a completely new approach that tries to address conventional ammunition management in a much more comprehensive perspective, both if you look at the life cycle, but also the different angles: safety, security, sustainability, and all that. So for me, that's what's really important about this global framework. It's difficult to single out, for example, individual objectives. I think it's the totality and it's the comprehensiveness of the approach. And obviously, you mentioned it, and I think there was no guarantee when we started out, and actually. Well, when we started out with the organizational session, that was early February 2022, you could already say that the international global situation was not the best one. But as we all know, there were events at the end of February that could have overshadowed very much the work of the open-ended working group. And luckily, we managed for a large part to keep global politics out of this discussion. And keep it what it really is, a win-win situation for all participants. If states in particular are better equipped to manage conventional ammunition in a safe, secure, and sustainable manner, then everybody wins. So I think that's one of the important factors for the success, and the fact that we've been able in a certain manner to shield this process from political turmoil, I think is a very good sign, and also gives hope for other areas of arms control and disarmament.
Yeah, definitely. Now we've got some questions, and these are excellent questions. Concerning, Michael Beer asked the questions about, he's raised a concern about health risks from lead-based ammunition in the environment, and that this is an increasing problem. Does the report at all, does the global framework at all address environmental concerns? Or is there scope for doing that under this framework?
Well, you need to look at the headline. It's about conventional ammunition management. So we are not claiming that this global framework is a panacea and solves any problem you might have with conventional ammunition. So when it comes to specific, let's say, chemical characteristics or features of certain types of conventional ammunition, when it comes to the way that conventional ammunition is used and then has certain effects and so on, this is not what the global framework is about. The global framework is about conventional ammunition management, but not in a very narrow sense, in a broad sense. So it includes, for example, everything you do with regard to transfers, to stockpiling, and to the safety and security issues involved around the life cycle. But it's not, if you ask regarding specifically, for example, ammunition containing specific chemicals or specific materials, that is not what it's supposed to address, other than, for example, the explosive risk of stockpiled ammunition or of ammunition in general. That is obviously a safety issue. The sustainability in this sense is less the environmental aspect. So obviously, when it comes to disposing of surplus ammunition, of obsolete ammunition and so on, this should be done in an environmentally friendly way. That is certainly also in the purpose of the sustainable. But the sustainable in this context is also addressing the need for sustainability of national efforts in improving the capabilities and improving the management. It doesn't help if you have good management, but due to deteriorating capabilities, this is not sustainable. So you need to look at the sustainability of all the measures that you're taking. So that's more the sustainable character of this global framework.
It could indirectly address some environmental concerns, for example, ensuring the safety by testing degraded ammunition and actually preventing explosions and the related damage to the environment. So, you're right. It's not a framework that directly addresses environmental concerns. It's a different, this is a tool of a different nature to that, but indirectly there could be some benefits. But let's quickly move along to another question. And this one is from Balkrishna Kurve about the illegal trade of small arms and light weapons in the global south, in regions such as Africa and South Asia and Southeast Asia, and the procurement of ammunition by terrorists and armed non-state actors. I see that, and if people read the framework, there really is an important emphasis and detailed emphasis on preventing diversion. And this is an important overall goal of the framework. Do you, Mr. von Wittke, could you expand on this matter?
Yes, certainly. So if you want, in a very condensed way, you could say that safety of conventional ammunition in the terms of conventional ammunition management relates to avoiding unplanned explosion, and security of conventional ammunition in the framework of conventional ammunition management relates to preventing diversion, relates to preventing unauthorized actors from getting their hands on ammunition and explosives. So we have three particular objectives that are specifically focusing on the prevention of diversion, and that is objectives 8, 9, and 10. So objective 8 is about supply chain transparency in the conventional ammunition transfer authorization process, and so, if you want, it's another term for export controls, if you want. That's something that is happening already, and I think we may be coming to that issue later. As you all know, in the Arms Trade Treaty, the provision on diversion in Article 11, they do not apply to conventional ammunition, because it clearly states in the Arms Trade Treaty that those measures only apply to the lists of weapons in Article 2, which is basically what you also have in the United Nations Register on Conventional Weapons, conventional arms, but it does not relate to the ammunition for these weapons. So I think that's very important. So the second one is also related to export controls, I'd say, when states take an obligation to mitigate the risk of post-transfer conventional ammunition diversion by using end-user certificates and clauses like no retransfer clauses and so on. And then the next objective, 10, obviously relates to the ability of let's say unwanted recipients to get access to cached or abandoned or uncleared conventional ammunition and the explosives contained therein. So that is about, first of all, obviously looking after the ammunition that you have stockpiled, but it's also about taking care of abandoned ammunition, taking care of explosive remnants of war and so on. So areas which could be a source for either complete ammunition or for at least for explosives. And I think that's very important. So when it comes to the management angle, again, I think this is quite comprehensive when it tries to prevent the diversion of conventional ammunition and explosives to the wrong hands.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I'd just like to return to the issue of the Arms Trade Treaty and what the global framework means for the ATT. Of course, this is a key concern of control arms, especially given our focus on achieving the robust regulation of the international arms trade, and especially Articles 6 and 7, which concern states not transferring conventional weapons when there is a risk of facilitating violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law. But I want to come back to this. Very much relates to your Objective 8, and unfortunately we test tried this pasting Objective 8 into the chat function, and it ended up being very messy. So I would really urge people to look at Objective 8. Mr. von Wittke, can you go into more detail about how you think the global framework will interact and what it could mean for the ATT, especially its risk assessment?
Well, I think beyond the aspect that the ATT does not, let's say, apply to the diversion of conventional ammunition, so therefore, that is a gap that the global framework is trying to plug. Obviously, in a different manner, because it's not a legally binding instrument. But as I mentioned at the beginning, the form of this set of political commitments with this specific structure of 2 tiers of measures allows us to go much more into detail than the ATT did. So you have specifically in Objective 8, I think, quite a list of measures, both the common enabling measures, but even more, I'd say, the second category, so the additional possible enabling measures that give you quite detailed ideas about how you can improve the transfer control processes. I wouldn't say it's a best practice guide, because that's not what the global framework is supposed to be, but obviously it's inspired by what is best practice in most countries that are performing very, very thorough export controls. Obviously this here with regard to conventional ammunition. But in the Arms Trade Treaty, you don't have as precise regulations regarding the way that diversion in the export or in the transfer control process should be integrated as one of the risks that the exporting country should be taken into consideration and should be addressing in its risk assessment. So I think that's I think one important fact, that on the one hand you have a political commitment to actually use instruments at your disposal to prevent diversion of conventional ammunition, and then spelling that out in much more detail than you would have in the Arms Trade Treaty for preventing diversion of conventional weapons themselves. So I think those are the two issues that are very relevant when it comes to Objective 8 and the relationship between the Arms Trade Treaty and the global framework.
Yeah, and you know, like I found it a highly exciting read when I went through Objective 8. And you're entirely right that Objective 8 in places provides much more detail than the Arms Trade Treaty. And for example, a key issue that doesn't receive the attention that it really deserves, and that is transit and transshipment. And if you look at efforts, it clearly sets out the some of the different actors that are involved in transit and transshipment, and puts emphasizes the importance of collecting and analyzing all relevant information from both primary and open sources. So this, you are right that it goes into more detail, and it will provide support for and reinforcement for the objectives of the ATT. I also think, and just one other point is that both instruments, both the ATT and the global framework, emphasize responsible action and emphasize that there has to be an assessment undertaken before the transfer of weapons and ammunition. So there's much in the way of interaction between both of the documents. But moving along, I really want to bring together several questions, and one is about moving forward. What can ATT states parties do to collectively support the global framework? And the other is, in terms of civil society, what was the contribution of civil society and academic organisations and research organisations to bringing about the global framework, and what will be the important next steps? So apologies, I realise I'm lumping several questions together at once, and I'm happy to go through them one by one.
Yeah, so I think the importance of civil society is generally acknowledged, and there's even one objective that talks very much about civil society and other relevant stakeholders. But the term civil society was hard fought. So if you look at specifically the last days of the negotiations, the term civil society was put in question at a certain point in time, but let's say due to the efforts of many delegations, it stayed in the document. Obviously, throughout the process, civil society played a very important role. We were hindered in a certain way by the rules of procedure and by the procedural arrangements that went along with the adoption of the rules of procedure regarding civil society participation. So we couldn't have civil society participate as in other fora, like, for example, if you look at the way civil society participates in the discussions of the CCW group of governmental experts. I think that's, if you want, from my perspective, a very liberal regime. where civil society can speak at every session after the list of speakers of member states is exhausted, which makes for a much more interactive debate. In the open-ended working group, due to this compromise regarding civil society participation, we were confined to having one dedicated session for civil society statements. But civil society was in the room all the time, was witnessing discussions going on. Even when we turned to informals, we didn't have, like, let's say, it could have been. And in Geneva, for example, happens quite frequently that certain delegations insist on excluding civil society from the discussions. That didn't happen in our negotiations. So civil society was able to follow, if they wanted, the discussion process. And then I think civil society also contributed to the process very much, either by direct contributions of working papers and so on, but also through the discussions with the chair, but more importantly, through their discussions with individual delegations. And I think that left an important mark on the process and helped a lot of the delegations, specifically the ones that are, let's say, not so well staffed and so on, helped them structure their contributions to the process and support the development of a very robust framework that we now have. And I think that's the importance of civil society. And moving on, I think it will be very important to keep civil society very close to the implementation of the global framework. Obviously, a lot of international cooperation and assistance is implemented by non-governmental organizations, is provided by non-governmental organizations, maybe with money provided by governments. But I think that's very important. There are important relationships already established, and I think those need to be put to good use. So I'm happy with the way that the place of civil society, both in the framework itself, so with Objective 15, but also in the follow-up and review process, is solidly established. And I think that's an important prerequisite for a sound implementation and a good follow-up process.
Hey, the question, what can ATT states parties collectively do together to support the global framework?
Well, first step is help adopt the global framework. As you know, it's not yet a global framework. It's a draft set of political commitments as a new global framework that still needs to be adopted by the General Assembly. Let's say, given the fact that the report of the open-ended working group and that the substantive part of this report has been adopted without a vote, I think gives reasons to hope that the General Assembly will actually adopt this global framework, and hopefully will do so in the same manner that the report of the open-ended working group was adopted. But that's important, and I think there will be some issues that still need to be clarified in the process of until the adoption by the General Assembly. One is certainly the fellowship program that is part of the international cooperation and assistance section, more precisely paragraph 35. And also states need to come together and develop the idea of how exactly the preparatory meeting in 2025 that is supposed to prepare the first meeting of states in 2027 should be structured, how long it is, and so on. All these issues need to be decided. So come with a constructive mind to the first committee discussions on these issues, on the resolution that will be the vehicle for the adoption of the global framework, and support the co-authors of that resolution, that is France and Germany, in drafting a good resolution that will enable us to fulfill all these goals. So that's the first step. And the second one, obviously, is implementation, both at national level, but also at regional, sub-regional level and global level. States that have ratified the Arms Trade Treaty, or even only signatory states, have already expressed a firm commitment to establish a sound export control system. For them, it's certainly relatively easy to insert the commitments in the global framework into their export control system. And I've seen in the participants list already a number of familiar names, let's say, from the export control world. And I hope that people will actually agree that what the global framework provides is a much more hands-on guide to implementation than the Arms Trade Treaty itself. So maybe the global framework can also inspire other areas of transfer controls, not related to conventional ammunition, but related to the weapons themselves. And therefore maybe also kindle some more take up on the latest developments in this area, and taking inspiration from the global framework. So I think there's hopefully a certain cross-pollination from the two documents and from the two processes.
Yeah, I agree. You previously, just in terms of moving forward, etc., and you spoke about how the global framework really acknowledges the role of all stakeholders, including civil society. And, in terms of taking it forward, it will be important not only states but civil society ensure that this is adopted at this year's General Assembly, and that all efforts are made to participate in the upcoming meetings in 2025 and 2027, and that the framework gets off to a successful start. We've talked about the successes, but in all negotiations, there are always sticking points and negatives. And you've talked about, I think you've talked about one of them, and that is concerning the involvement of civil society. Were there other negatives or particular sticking points in the negotiations?
Yes, and so please don't take away from this discussion that the civil society participation was a negative point. It was just under discussion, and actually, to be more precise, for those that didn't follow that discussions, and I could understand why, because it was just organizational procedural stuff. But it happened at a time when, in parallel, the ramifications for other open-ended working groups were set up. So in a way, the fact how we agreed on participation of civil society and non-governmental organizations in the framework of the open-ended working group was also a reflection of discussions going on elsewhere, not setting a precedent in whatever direction. So that's the first thing. So in the end, I think we had, for example, I would have expected from the outset that Objective 11 on marking and tracing of conventional ammunition would be one of the hotly debated issues until the end. Actually, that issue was settled at the third session already. So there were a number of sticky points. Those that stayed until the end had to be solved until the end, and one of them being Objective 8. The term of risk assessment itself was very much questioned by a group of states, namely the Arab group, and I think it's no secret that they are no big fans of risk assessments, of one state assessing the risk of another state behaving in a certain manner and so on. So that was an issue that needed to be solved. But I think the way that solution was found, the cooperative way of actually delegations getting together, discussing with each other, and trying to hammer out compromise language that would be acceptable for all was really very good. So I personally, as somebody who's been involved in export control, don't see that the text was actually weakened. Certain words had to be avoided, but the underlying notions are still in there. So I think that's certainly a win to have this important group of states on board with this global framework. The issue, for example, of the applicability to which range of ammunitions, making it explicit that the global framework refers also, but not only, but also to small arms and light weapons ammunition, I think is very important. As I mentioned at the outset, it's very important to settle the dust and to settle the debate in the context of the program of action. But I think it's also for all those that implement the global framework, it's very important that this is a clear reference that all types of conventional ammunition, from the smallest to the largest calibers, should be taken into account when promoting safe, secure, and sustainable through life conventional ammunition management. There were some other issues, but in the end, they weren't as contentious as you might have believed. For example, the fellowship program was introduced at a very late stage, i.e. the third substantive session, which could have been the last session. The fact that it had already been discussed and proposed under the program of action on small arms and light weapons certainly helped. So many people had a good idea of what such a fellowship program could look like, and so on. So that was another example. Objective 14, you know, certainly that's the gender objective. Obviously, there was a lot of discussion on these issues, as there usually when you are in a UN body on disarmament and arms control. There are different views, but I think the language that we found is a very good reflection of what you can achieve today in a forum that is not, let's say, where you do not have the requirement of consensus, but where you're actually looking for a consensus. And in the end, I think, again, it's very important that having this framework adopted without a vote, that also the compromises found for Objective 14 work in both directions. They work also for the states that are normally very reluctant to deal with that issue. And I think that's important.
Can I just pick up on Objective 14 on gender? And it really is an excellent example of gender mainstreaming in action. How do you see the steps under that objective being taken forward?
First of all, I think that Objective 14 obviously is a snapshot of the ongoing gender mainstreaming debate we have in all kinds of disarmament and arms control fora and beyond. So I think this is probably one of the objectives that where the, let's say, the practical developments will probably at a relatively fast pace overtake the letter of Objective 14 and of the measures. But I think the measures are formulated in a way that is actually adaptable and, if you want, future-proof. It's not very prescriptive in measures. It basically tries to establish the concept of gender mainstreaming and that this should permeate everything that you're doing under the global framework. So I think this is if you want, a very dynamic objective, which by virtue of having its own place in the framework and by being so pervasive across the framework, will have an influence, a very particular influence on the implementation and on future discussions, both in the follow-up process to the global framework, but I think also in other disarmament and arms control fora, first and foremost in the Program of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons.
Yeah. Hey, the time is nearly up. Our time with you today has been much too short. But we haven't been able to get to all of the questions, but there is a last question, and that is, you talked about how different actors came together and really talked to each other to resolve issues. Throughout the negotiations, were there military to military discussions?
There were also military to military discussion. That depends obviously on the composition of delegations, but certainly a number of delegations had military advisors among them, which obviously is very beneficial when you're talking about relatively technical subjects. I think a lot of participants lack the technical knowledge to really be able to talk about adequate surveillance measures for different types of ammunition, the chair included. I'm a diplomat. I'm not a trained weapons or explosives and ammunition management officer. So I think that was very useful to have these people involved. Also, obviously, in my team, I had people that had special expertise on these issues over many years, and we could draw on others, and I think that was extremely important. In the end, I think it all came together by people discussing with each other and by exchanging views, and the fact that not everyone in the room was a specialist on conventional ammunition management, I think didn't prevent us from reaching a really good result. Because obviously you also need a little bit of diplomatic knowledge and skills to formulate your positions in a way and to act in a way that makes it possible for each and every delegation to accommodate concerns of other delegations and end up with a result that is so good that you wouldn't want to oppose it.
Yeah. Hey, well, our time is up, but I really want to congratulate you on what has been a remarkable and a successful outcome. I know that our discussion has not gone entirely as we had planned today, but thanks to the members of the audience for the questions that have been posed. We've been asked again if there will be a recording of this discussion. And there certainly will be, and you can find that on the different control arms social media accounts, and we will look at emailing out this recording as well. So with this, it now remains for me to thank you, Mr. von Wittke, for joining us today and really for your leadership on what was a very critical gap in arms control. I understand that you're going to be moving on to a new post at the end of the summer, and I want to wish you all the very best. And I hope that you'll be staying in contact with the disarmament and arms control community. And if not, that one day you will return and that you will see that we have indeed moved forward and made progress towards realizing the objectives of the global framework. Really to anybody who has been involved in work on ammunition, when you read the global framework, it is really a wonderful surprise to see what has been set out there and what the common ground that has been established on what previously was a contentious issue. So to our audience, thanks very much to everyone for joining us. Again, if you haven't already done so, I urge you to read the global framework, to make sure that you are tuned in for when it's adopted at the General Assembly. The global framework is not a cure for insomnia, as it will keep you awake with the realization that progress in even these very difficult times is indeed possible. So thanks everybody very much once again, and I wish everyone an enjoyable Friday and an enjoyable weekend. Thanks very much, and thanks very much, Mr. von Wittke.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I'm certainly going to keep myself informed about what's going on and hope to be returning relatively soon to the world of disarmament and arms control. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.